Hey everybody, welcome to What the Flick. Bibbs, Alonso, Mystery Science Theater is back.
Yay! We're both huge fans, I think.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. This is my fandom. Like,
Yeah.
Like Star Wars and Star Trek and other stuff that people like devote their lives to. Like, great, fine, I got no beef with it, but they never set me on fire the way Mystery Science Theater did.
Well, can we talk about just what a crazy last weekend we had? Because not only did Doctor Who come back,
right.
Not only did Mystery Science Theater 3000 come back, but we had Star Wars Celebration and a trailer for The Last Jedi. It was a busy time to be a nerd.
Yeah,
it was really great.
We have taken over the culture, and I don't think that's necessarily a good thing because I long for outsiderdom, but that's just me.
I liked the variety that something weird like Mystery Science Theater 3000 could bring. Or something like Star Trek when it was a little bit more on the fringe. When it becomes the institution, you start wanting to look in the periphery. What else is weird? What else is crazy? And
it's funny that you bring it up because I remember my experience of discovering the show in the first place, or encountering it for the first time. I was 25 and just randomly changing channels and hit upon the Pod People episode, and within seconds I was like, "What is this?"
I had heard legends. Like people were like, I was at a party and they were watching this movie and there were these robots and they were talking over it, and it seemed like some weird thing that maybe happened once that you'd never like back before the internet.
Right.
There's a lot of rumors about stuff you might have seen on TV once, and then we happened upon Cave Dwellers.
No, there you go. Good one.
Changed it. Oh my God, still my favorite episode. It's great.
But this show comes from this sort of, it was, I'd say it probably coincided with the dawn of the internet in terms of, the sort of earliest, rec arts, groups or whatever, or like AOL chat rooms, that kind of thing. But it was a show that I think, you would sort of still stumble upon, and it said keep circulating the tapes because you were literally getting VHS cassettes and passing them around to people.
That's how people could see the show. A lot of times, not everyone had cable, not everyone had the same cable.
Yeah, I remember living in a place where Comedy Central only aired 12 hours a day.
And
some marathons would like stop in the middle of a movie because we got Comedy Central from like midnight to noon or vice versa.
What's the point of that?
I know,
terrible.
It was crazy. It was lame. It was a simpler time.
But nowadays people riffing to watch something and then respond in real time is maybe not commonplace, but it's very well known. It's an accepted form of humor, and the alumni of MST3K have been doing it on like Riff Tracks, Cinematic Titanic.
Right.
A lot of people have done their own various versions of it. I think a lot of like online like video film critics are using that sort of same basic mentality to sort of have a conversation back and forth with the film in real time. And I think that's the thing that made MST3K so exciting, was you're not just watching a movie, you're watching other people watch a movie and you're getting their interior monologue. You're actually like the response of a movie in real time, what you're thinking, what other people are thinking, and what they're thinking is engaging and funny and sometimes very observant.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, it introduced a lot of these movies to a generation that might not otherwise have seen them.
This is true. I came of age still with like the med beds with Golden Turkey Awards and 50 Worst Films of All Time. So I had some clue about some of those movies, but yeah, this obviously was a deep dive into that kind of material. Anyway, so the show is back with original creator Joel Hodgson back at the helm.
Yep.
And so they dropped 13 episodes on Netflix, so it's been a real embarrassment of riches, and I have binged the whole thing.
Because like 13 episodes of Netflix is like twice as long as it takes to watch 13 episodes of like Daredevil, because they're feature-length films.
Well, they're 90-minute episodes, but like it's a 1.5%. Yeah, but it's still it's a lot, and
So there's still a couple episodes I haven't seen, although I did watch the last episode.
Okay, cool. So the premise now is that Jonah Ray plays a guy named Jonah Heston, who has been captured and sent to the dark side of the moon by one King of Forrester, who is the daughter of Clayton and granddaughter of Pearl. She's played by Felicia Day, and her sidekick Max, who prefers to go by TV's son of TV's Frank, is Patton Oswalt.
Yeah.
And otherwise, it's pretty much the same. And we have new voices as the bots. Hampton Yount is Crow, and Baron Vaughn, who you might know from Grace and Frankie and from Leonard Maltin's podcast, is the new Tom Servo. There's a new Gypsy.
Yeah, who has a voice that is more like She originally had a voice that was more, I don't know, honking. Yeah, it was a little broader, and they decided to just make her more of a traditional character.
Yes.
She also hangs from the ceiling as opposed to
coming up from the bottom,
which seems like just a mere aesthetic choice. But when you think about it, now it's in widescreen, and you kind of want to fill the frame more, and it gives you a lot more options.
And there's a running gag where when Gypsy is sort of playing a character in a host sketch, they will have a hanger on her neck with like a torso and a dress or whatever. It's actually kind of funny. It's an effective sight gag.
And when they're in the theater, and again, because it's now all the films are on widescreen, again, there's a lot more negative space. So there's nothing in the foreground, and so sometimes they have Gypsy periodically throughout the movie sort of going about her business on the ship, dropping down, doing something,
making a comment, then going back up.
Yeah.
Tom Servo now flies around a lot and will interact with the screen. Like there's one shot of like they're in some forest with these like giant mushrooms. He's like boing boing boing, like that kind of stuff. So that's fun. But I mean, generally speaking, it's the same premise. It is hapless guy and two robots sitting through bad movies and wisecracking their way through it to maintain their sanity. And the wisecracks are good. I mean, this is a well-written show. Still, they obviously, I think what's if you want to sort of pinpoint what's changed about this, this was originally like a handful of people in Minnesota putting together this show on a super low budget in an office park somewhere, and now obviously they've got more money to throw around. You have a house band that's led by Harmar Superstar. You have there's that same kind of aesthetic that Hodgson and the original guys brought to it, where like it's toy models and obvious models.
It feels very DIY, but it's obviously more expensive than it ever used to be.
Yeah.
There are other differences as well. I think.
Sure,
There's, for example, now there's actually, although I would never call it a serialized narrative, there are story bits that track throughout. So Max has a crush on King of Forrester. That builds throughout the episode until we have a big climax. Should we talk about the climax?
Let's not. But I'm assuming that people are probably still working over there.
It builds to a big ending.
There's recurring things going on, and I would highly recommend, since he's far too modest to say it himself, check out the B Movies podcast, which is Bibbs's podcast. He and Whitney did a really great interview with Joel Hodgson, and they talk about how Hodgson has tons to talk about with this show. Obviously, it's his baby, but he says that in the case of the Netflix show, that they have this luxury of thinking that people are going to actually watch them in order, whereas on the old show, you had to assume that every episode that somebody tuned into was the first time they'd ever seen it.
Yeah, they'd share a lot of reruns, they'd air a lot of marathons. There was no conceivable way to know what order people would see the show.
And that's kind of an interesting side effect of the whole sort of Netflix effect, because I noticed the same thing on their One Day at a Time revival. Like most sitcoms operate in a very sort of discrete world where each 30 minutes, like a thing happens and then it's resolved and then it's over and it's done.
Yeah.
Whereas on that one, you would get callbacks to something that happened 3 episodes earlier, or you would get, I mean, obviously a lot of sitcoms have arcs, but this was very kind of nitty gritty, like, well, you remember that thing that happened a few, 3 episodes ago, we'll make some reference to it. So that's, I think, kind of a cool side effect of how these shows are being put out now.
But for the most part, except for like the last couple episodes when the narrative starts coming together a bit, you can kind of watch them in any order.
You could pop in and just catch one randomly and totally be on top of what's going on. The other big difference, I think, is that, again, because the show before was done by this group of comedians from the Twin Cities, you would get these references to things like, Mary Jo Peel's dad is the mayor of Circle Pines, Minnesota. And so like jokes about Circle Pines or jokes about like, go to the Dells and see the ducks or whatever. There's more sort of LA-ish stuff in this one. Like there's jokes about Celino and Barnes or about like
In-N-Out Burger. I think
there's like, sort of the kind of, directional jokes, that sort of thing. There's more of a polish to it, both visually and in terms of I think the patter of the comedy, but not in a way that I think detracts from the show. If anything, it just sort of feels like it's evolved to this new place, but it never felt, it still has the sort of integrity and
it still feels like MST3K.
Yeah,
that's a good thing. And I think the MST3K is not simply riffing. I think there's more to it than that. I think there's a reason why they didn't just do another riff show, because they kept doing riff shows.
Yes, absolutely.
There's no reason not to do another riff show. It's a perfectly reasonable form of comedy. You can apply to anything with new personalities. We like the idea of it. I think we like the aesthetic of it. And when I was a kid, I really responded to MST3K not just as a riff show, not just as a presentation of old movies. It was kind of like my Mr. Rogers. Like Joel would talk directly to you and introduce you to his bots, and they'd actually have conversations about how cinema worked. And like, here's an explanation of Foley.
Right, I remember that one.
And there was something that was really simple about that. And I think when this show works at its best, I think they did a really smart move coming out of the gate with Reptilicus. Not because it's the funniest episode, it's actually not. But because the first host segment after the show begins is a series highlight, not just a new series highlight, the whole thing. And it's Every Monster Has a Country. Every Country Has a Monster.
Yeah,
that's a funny song.
They bust out probably the entire season's best musical number right off the bat.
And it's like an Animaniacs episode where they're going to sing every country in the world, but we're going to sing every country in the world and how they relate to their most famous monster.
Right. Yeah,
it really works. It's funny.
Yeah, no, that's extraordinary, and you can find that one on YouTube. I think it's called Jonah's Kaiju Rap.
Yeah.
I have to say, if there's stuff that I would maybe kind of put a pin in that I would have liked to have seen stronger. I don't know that all the songs are on that level, and
no, they're not.
And I own the two Clown in the Sky CDs. Like, I really like the music on this show. There are other songs that pop up late in the season that I think were kind of forgettable. There are some. Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, there's one in Star Crash that they sing in the middle of the movie, actually, which is actually I thought was like upper echelon, but a lot of the other ones that they sing like during the host segments are not great.
Yeah, there's celebrity cameos, which apart from Leonard Maltin, I don't think the show ever had in the past.
Not really, no. And even Leonard Maltin was weird.
Yeah, that was sort of random.
But there's one with. And that's the way host segments work or guest segments work is someone flies up, they have a little moment, they have a sketch. But the sketches are always weird because they're always in their ship talking to the camera and everyone else is talking to the camera. And it doesn't necessarily, if there isn't like a good concept for the sketch, it just sort of sits flat.
Yeah, because like before when they would have like, Give Me Rocket number 9 and Hugh Beaumont or the Polka Band or whatever would show up, they would come in on, was it the Hexfield view screen?
Yeah, Hexfield view screen.
And so there was eye contact and there was back and forth, but yeah, these sort of one shot and then back to this shot and then back to this shot.
Yeah.
It's kind of a comedy killer.
And they've got some big celebrities and they're for the most part, they're kind of wasted.
Yeah, I think like well, I don't want to give away who they are. There's one in the very last episode that I think is really funny.
Yeah.
The other ones I found mostly negligible.
There is a reunion bit where someone who is a famous sort of project they did with one of the actors that's only exists because, hey, remember that other thing?
Yes, exactly.
It comes out of nowhere. The song isn't really about anything relevant, and the song isn't that great, even though they're obviously very charming.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is somewhat disappointing. There's a couple other bits
I do like the callbacks to the old show in terms of Pearl and Brain Guy and Professor Bobo show up. Like,
well, the house band plays old songs from MST3K.
Yes.
They'll play Creepy Girl. They'll play Wild Rebels.
Living in Deep 13. And,
always
a lot
good.
Of those songs.
But sometimes some of the things they've come up with are a little. I don't know. I feel like maybe they overthought it. There's this idea that Kinga has come up with a new form of film distribution that's liquid, and it's kind of crap, and we're watching it on that thing. So every once in a while, a bunch of bubbles will pop up through the screen, and part of the reason that's there is to hide cuts because they're always in one locked off shot.
Yeah.
But they do it sometimes just kind of randomly, and it never adds anything.
Yeah,
you would think they would do like a Grindhouse thing where you'd cut to like a minute later, and it's like a funny gag that you missed something cool.
Right.
That would be the joke, but instead it's just there to be there.
I'm going to be plugging Bibbs this week on your recap about on your show Canceled Too Soon, where you talk about the TV wheel. You talk about how, which is another Joel Hodgson concept that never made it past the one pilot that they shot.
This weird premise, and it was him with Judd Apatow and David Cross.
No, and it's very funny. There's a lot of good stuff in it, but I think sometimes Hodgson, I mean, like Mystery Science Theater as a concept worked beautifully, and he invented this thing for like a local TV station, and it took off. I think sometimes he gets a little mired in these ideas. Like, you remember if you watched the cinematic Titanic, there was that whole thing about the time tube or something.
Like, he's a gadget-based comedian, and he likes the gimmicks and the technology. And for the most part, I like all of the new invention exchanges where he comes up with goofy concepts. What's your favorite new invention exchange?
I like the first one, which is the bubble fan.
Well, that's just a good idea. Yeah. I love punt bunnies.
Punt bunnies are great.
They're the adorable little pets that enjoy being kicked. That's actually, and Felicia Day's glee with kicking punt bunnies, and Pat Nelson's just like, no, stop kicking them. No, they enjoy it. Pow. So fun.
Yeah, no,
but
so
it's good. He
I
likes
think
that stuff.
He does.
I think sometimes to a fault.
I think, yeah, sometimes I think he needs to like remove one piece of jewelry. You know, like I think there's like a little too much of that going on. And I have to say, and I know she's internet royalty, so forgive me for this, I don't think Felicia Day has quite nailed it yet as far as the way that the villains on this show are always a little on the cartoony side.
Yes, when she's on that, she's great.
Yeah.
And sometimes the host segments, and this has always been kind of true, feel a little slack. Now that can be part of their charm, that they're just sort of chilling with the host and the bots.
Right.
But sometimes it just feels like they only have half a joke, or sometimes they only have half a character moment, and they're kind of burning through it just in like a couple of bits, not much rehearsal, not really nailing every take. And while that may add to the charm, it also sometimes takes away from getting engaged.
You know, there's a dynamic there where, I think like, your host, whether it's Joel or Mike or now Jonah, and the bots, you're right, they can have a little more laid back thing. And then the Deep 13 always it needs to be a little more cartoony. And so, I've always liked, I liked Clayton, I liked Pearl, I liked how those segments work. And I think she's a little too 21st century in her approach and a little too like chill when what's fun about these characters is that they're more extreme and exaggerated, and I think Oswald is getting it.
Oswald's getting it, and I think what works in this one's favor, and which I hope, hopefully they'll do more seasons, and I think they'll fall into it more easily, is that they have a good dynamic.
Yeah.
Where she's controlling and needy and kind of a diva and always out for ratings, and he's deals with it partially because he's enthusiastic about the MSC3K geekiness, but partially because he's in love with her. You've got a dynamic there that I honestly don't think we ever really had with Pearl and the others, just because their purpose was always a little more hazy a lot of the time. I felt like a lot of the time they were sending in movies because that's the premise of the show. Whereas here it feels like there's more there's more structure, and within that you can play and hopefully grow and fall into it. Because when she's great, she's great. Like when they're doing the Dino Steaks commercial, and she's really, when she's committed to like the ratings and the bit, she's great. But sometimes she doesn't have the material.
No, she has moments, and I think I can see her growing into this more and being more like, feeling more free to go with it and go bigger. I think that's kind of where she would benefit going. I mean, I think that the dynamic between her and Max is similar to the one between Clayton and Frank, which is that like Frank was sort of, for whatever reason, Frank was the foil and was there to suffer and take all the abuse that was heaped upon him. Brain Guy and Bobo had a different relationship with Pearl, but I think Max is there to be abused and like it.
How do you feel about Jonah?
I think Jonah's fine. I don't really know his career before this. I knew the name, but I remember I went to that, there was that Riff Tracks show they did that was a Fathom event, and it was a reunion, and it was everybody.
Oh yeah, I heard about that.
And he came out and did a couple of things. I was like, oh, okay, this guy seems to have some chops. And I think his delivery in the theater is great. And he's a little laid back in the host segments and not in the focused, laid back way that Joel was, but I think it works. I like the interplay.
Well, one thing that's interesting is the interaction between the host and the bots previously was a bit more, I think, codified. I think Joel was their father because he created them and he would teach them things about being human. And then Mike came along and he was more like their roommate.
Yeah.
And they were just a bunch of guys hanging out. And I'm not entirely sure what Jonah's connection to them is. I think he's more bemused as a caretaker, like they're almost like his pets, and he has to just sort of take care of them. There's a whole bit where he keeps introducing new robots for them to destroy, because they have to destroy something somewhat semi-regularly in order to like keep going.
That, and also because I think he legitimately tries to build new robots and they destroy them because they don't want to be usurped in any way.
I hope Growler keeps coming back. I like Growler.
There's a lot of I think the host segments, there's a lot of fun stuff there. I like the invention exchanges back. That was something that I think in the Mike years kind of went away because that was a Joel thing.
They never knew what to do with that host segment after that, though. Like they never found like a good replacement, like a good excuse for them to talk more than here's your movie. And I think a lot of the old segments at the beginning of episodes in the Mike years just seemed kind of arbitrary. And so I think bringing that back was so smart. Not just because it's Joel and he likes gadgets, but because it gives you that grounding, and it gives you like a fun little bit before the thing begins.
They do also, even though there are no commercials in this, obviously they still have those kind of breaks at the 15 and 45 mark, which is a nice breather if you just need some place to like pause and go to the bathroom or whatever.
I like the new mechanic for the cold open, where there's always like a little intro with the bots and Jonah, and they're just going about their day, and then Jonah gets sucked into the credit sequence and has to reenact it over and over again.
I like the mechanics of it. I don't get why they make him do it over and over again.
I wish they'd play with it a little bit and change it somewhat.
Well, yeah, because he gets sucked into it, but then it's the exact same credit sequence anyway. It's like, yeah, if they made him do it every time and he just got more fed up with doing the same repetitious thing over and over again, I think that would be funnier, but that would also have been more expensive.
It's amusing, but they have this big intro where we see Jonah get kidnapped, and it's not just told in the song. We actually like have a bit, and there's a couple of cameos. It feels like they're adding more plot to that, and I kept expecting it to pay off. Like he was like hauling something in his spacecraft
meteors,
that was like really valuable, like Moon 02 like type meteors, and no one's looking for those. I kept expecting like Will Wheaton to show up or something.
In the first episode, there's this sort of throwaway thing in Gizmonics Institute of Will Wheaton and Wilma Deering from Buck Rogers, Aaron Gray, having this conversation about how Jonah's a rebel who doesn't follow the rules, and it's funny, and it's like they're clearly setting up this sort of typical character, but then it's dropped, and it's sort of like, well, then why do we really need to know who this guy is when it ultimately doesn't matter?
Well, and then they skip ahead 2 months. Like he's been there 2 months,
right?
And he's already like, and I'm like, I kind of wanted to have that bit of like acclamation, and I think that would have helped me like get to know his character a little bit more, because by the time we meet him, he's just really accepting of his fate. Well, he doesn't even really want to escape all that bad.
True, but I mean, it was kind of the same with Mike. He got bonked at the end of one episode, and then the next episode he's been clearly like doing treining with the bots to get ready for the experiment.
But at the same time, Mike had escape attempts initially. Even in like the first episode, he tried to like re-access the guidance system, and it turns out that the bots had tried that already, and they didn't want to tell him because they didn't want him to leave him. And it was a moment. It's that the idea of being forced to watch terrible cinema is the fundamental idea of the show. And yeah, it's basically just an excuse to riff on movies, but it is all you've got. So if you ignore it,
you might as well lean into it. Yeah,
play with it a little bit. The one thing I think, and I talked to Joel about this on the podcast, and I think maybe it's something this season needed. Every once in a while, not often, there'd be a movie that actually almost broke them in the original show, particularly Manos, The Hands of Fate. But I think Hobgoblins was pretty bad as well, or The Castle of Fu Manchu. Even Cave Dwellers left them really dazed at the end. And I think that right there just reminds you that, yeah, it's actually hard to watch some of these movies on their own. I pity anyone who tries to watch Cry Wilderness without the riffs. Cry Wilderness is amazingly bad.
Yeah.
Like, by the way, we haven't really talked about it, and I think we should wrap this up in a second, but what are your favorite episode or episodes so far?
Well, because I'm the Christmas guy, of course, I love that they did The Christmas That Almost Wasn't. I liked Avalanche a lot.
Really?
Yeah, that one. But the thing is, I think the show covers such a net about the kind of bad movies that they do that people have their favorites. So if you like Zipperback Monsters, they've got them. If you like Oily Hercules, they've got that. If you like kind of crappy 80s swords and sorcery, they've got it. If you like Star Wars ripoffs, they've got that. So I tend to lean towards the movies with big stars who should have known better. Like your Maroons.
And I like the ones that are just absolute travesties from beginning to end. So my favorite so far are Cry Wilderness. And honestly, even though it's kind of a bigger production, Beast of Hollow Mountain.
That's pretty great.
So terrible that it's really funny.
And I had never seen Star Crash. So.
Oh my God. I actually got in a tiff with Joel about that. I think Star Crash is actually a pretty good movie for what it is. For what it is. I think people sometimes accuse MST3K of being a little cynical and encouraging sort of a disregard for these films. And I think if that's what you're getting out of it, I think you're getting it wrong. But one thing I do say is that sometimes I think they make fun of something simply because it's old or from a different time period or has a different style as opposed to because it's bad. And you'll notice they did this with their last proper episode ever before this, Danger Diabolic.
That's an actual good movie.
That's a legit good movie, but like what you can make fun of is the fact that it's so 60s, it's bleeding out its eyes 1960s.
Right.
Star Crash is so Euro schlock that it is bleeding out its eyes, Euro schlock. But it's good Euro schlock. Like, it's entertaining, stylish. This is not a film that's trying to grab you like Star Wars. This is a film you're just supposed to sort of lean into and take some drugs and just enjoy.
But it is a movie that only exists to remind you of Star Wars.
Basically.
And to make you think that maybe you're watching Star Wars through one eye. It's kind of like the Turkish Star Wars, you know. It is just like, well, there's this and there's this and there's this. And,
but I think but Star Wars exists because he couldn't get the rights to Flash Gordon, so who are we to judge?
Fair enough.
I like Star Crash more than most. I think they're a little unfair to that one, but still, it's a funny episode. Like, it's really funny.
I don't think there's a stinker in the bunch. I laugh out loud with regularly through all of these episodes.
Yeah, I sometimes fall into a rhythm where I just start watching the movie, because what I will say is they cleaned up these films. They actually look pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, it's actually kind of nice to watch a piece of crap that's actually been like made to look nice.
And the thing that Joel talked about with you guys was this notion that they really are waiting for the gaps in the movie to talk into. So you are, it's not just them constantly talking over and interrupting. So if you're there to watch the movie, you are kind of getting that in while at the same time you're getting the jokes.
Yeah, that's the trick, because you don't want to like just talk over the movie like you're more important. You are here for the movie. Yeah. And a lot of people are going to see these movies for the first time just because they're going to see the crane. I think that's great.
Okay, here's one last request for Shout Factory or whoever is going to make this happen. Somebody needs to release the HBO Latino version of Mystery Science Theater 3000, the movie, which had a dubbed This Island Earth and a dubbed Joel or Mike and the Bots, but dubbed so literally that none of the jokes make sense.
That's a real thing?
It's a real thing.
That's amazing.
I have it on VHS somewhere. It's bananas.
That's amazing. Yes, release that.
Yes,
that sounds fantastic.
The world needs to see this thing. Anyway, so we're fans. We dug it, and hope you like it. And I'm hoping there's a season 2. So thanks for watching.
Keep circulating the tapes.